there was like these really, really old Pinoy guys chain smoking cigarettes. Like, they'd covered the army and the PMP like for years, and they just saw me and they're like, oh, this is just an American on a joyride, like back to the homeland. So they didn't really take me seriously then because they were like, oh, she's just American. She's not Filipino. She doesn't really know what it's like. And they're not wrong. Growing up in the Philippines is not my lived reality. I had never done that before. I don't know what it's like to grow up as a Filipino in the Philippines, but it doesn't mean that I don't deserve a spot or space in the Philippines. And same thing in the US. Like, even though I'm not a white person, I'm not, a quote unquote American in that way, I still deserve to be there as well.
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. My name is Isabel, your podcast host, and I'm here to find stories that challenge biases we face every day. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Jessica De Jesus, a Filipino-American PR professional born in the Philippines and raised in Southern California. Having lived in Manila, LA, Washington, D.C., and Hong Kong, Jess talks to us about her experience growing up Filipino-American and the culture shocks she had along the way. Welcome back to Proudly Asian, everyone. Now, joining us in the studio in Hong Kong and sitting right next to me is Jess. I'm so lucky to have her, to have been able to book her for the studio session with her because she is about to move on to her next chapter and move to New York, moving back to America.
Yes.
So, yay! New York is so lucky to have a superstar like you, Jess. How are you? Welcome to Proudly Asian.
Thank you, Isabel, for having me first and foremost. I feel so lucky to be here. Yeah, I'm good. Just literally trying to get through these next couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Moving internationally twice in a year was not really my plan at all. A lot harder than you think to move internationally by yourself. Yeah. I probably should have known that, but here we are.
Well, but at least you went through it, you survived it, and you're a lot stronger now. And also with us, like we also have some Marks and Sparkle, which is so kindly gifted to me during the recent Proudly Asian Friendsgiving event from one of the guests. So I thought this would be the right occasion for us to pop this bottle and just have ourselves a little bit of booze.
A little bit of a girly chat.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Isabel.
This
is the ASMR section.
Yes. So, shall we get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Jess.
Yes.
So let's get into a question or like a few questions that we always we always ask our guests on Proudly Asian, which is let's start from the basics. Tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
Okay, who am I? I am Jessica De Jesus. Hello. I'm Filipino-American. I was born in the Philippines. I was born in Manila. And then we immigrated to Los Angeles. And I grew up in a city called San Dimas. And my parents live in Pasadena now. That's where I went to high school. It's a little bit of background.
Amazing. So at what age did you move to LA?
I was 5. So I was quite young. Yeah.
I mean, how was it for you, like for 5-year-old Jess to be like going from Asia to America, like this new city? Was it intimidating or were you just kind of like going along?
Yeah. So it's funny. I actually feel like I do remember a lot from my childhood in the Philippines. My mom, I think, once said, like, I think I really like held on to those memories, and because we moved and it was such a big shift, so surprisingly I actually remember a lot from that like 1 to 5 range, and then it gets a little bit blurry, but I like distinctly remember the car ride from the airport to this. My dad had moved to America before we did, sort of set up a little bit of a life, got an apartment, and I remember on the drive to the apartment, my mom was repeating our home phone number. Remember when we used to have home phones and like landlines, and she was repeating it over and over again. So I was really excited, I think. I didn't realize what was happening. I think I was quite young. And yeah, I didn't really have an awareness, I think, of what a big move it was. My brother was a little bit older. He might have felt that, but um yeah, it was just a new experience.
Wow. So you've actually started moving internationally, like making all these big moves since age 5.
Yes.
So you're an experienced international mover.
Would hardly say that, but thank you so much.
Now, I mean, of course, like you grew up between the Philippines, LA, as you mentioned. So how many languages do you speak?
I speak 2, though my Tagalog is quite bad, unfortunately. You lose a lot of it when you don't use your language, right? And we speak both Tagalog and English at home. My brother and I started responding to our parents in English when we moved to America. So our Tagalog like really deteriorated. It's gotten a lot better for me out here though, because I just spend more time with Filipinos. I've been back to the Philippines multiple times. So it's gotten better. Thank God. So good lesson for the future. Just keep practicing your language, your second language.
Yeah, that's so important. And of course, we talked a little bit about that. But then, like, what was it like growing up in a Filipino-American household? I'm just wondering about like your schooling experience. Like, were your parents kind of like tiger parents, expecting you to like go into one of those traditional Asian jobs?
Yeah.
And also, what kind of breakfast did you grow up eating?
All the childhood things. So I loved growing up in a Filipino household. I cannot recommend that enough. 10 out of 10. Filipinos are so fun, and there's just so much love to go around. Obviously every family has their generational traumas and craziness and all the crazy aunties and uncles and titas and titos, but the Filipinos have so much love to give. There's so much community. There's always someone's house to go to, a cousin to visit, someone in town. You learn how to like socialize at a very young age, and your cousins become like lifelong friends. It's been lovely to watch some of those relationships from when I was younger evolve into like adult friendships, and now I have like cousins to rely on in this life. So you're never lonely, for sure. I really loved that aspect.
And you're never hungry growing up.
Never hungry. No, definitely never hungry. And yeah, Filipinos, our parties are always just open and big, and anyone can come and go as you please. My dad personally loved the going part.
There's more leftover boxes to pack.
Yeah. He's like, let's head out. My mom is a bit more of the extrovert, but yeah, growing up in a Filipino household is just so much full of love. It's lovely. Breakfast was pretty traditionally American, I would say. My brother and I liked cereal and waffles. We had a mixture of Asian lunches, American lunches. I personally love a tuna sandwich, so my mom used to pack those. It's a little fun fact for you all. So yeah, pretty like a good mix of both cultures. I felt like my parents did a really good job, I think, of always remembering that we're a Filipino family and that we're Filipino. But yeah, I didn't ever really feel like the Americanness was like shoved down our throats. I think a lot of Filipino immigrants feel the pressure to assimilate. They don't teach their children Tagalog. They don't speak to them in Tagalog. They only speak to them in English. And my family still kept a lot of that in and amongst ourselves, and made sure that we were exposed to that. So yeah.
That's cool. I know, like, on Proudly Asian, we've previously interviewed some Filipino-American guests as well. And then they mentioned, one thing that they always mention is like during the weekends, especially like Sunday, they would have some sort of sea log for breakfast. Like, did you
Oh,
have that?
yeah. Yeah, actually. So my favorites are tapa and tocino, which are a
Oh.
beef and a pork. And also our McDonald's have
Mm.
like rice and longanisa and eggs.
In the
And
Philippines.
yeah, in the
What?
Philippines. Oh my gosh, yeah. Have you not had McDonald's in the Philippines?
I
It's
only
the
had
greatest.
Jollibee breakfast in the Philippines, and I
Oh,
love their long silog. And
yes, very similar. The one in McDonald's. Ugh, amazing. It's my favorite breakfast.
wow.
Yes, delicious.
Long silog is definitely my
Yeah.
favorite. I'm a simple person.
Absolutely. It's the best. It's great for a reason. But yeah, my parents also were not tiger parents,
Mm.
which I was very lucky.
Is
And
it
same with my
rare
brother.
among like Filipino parents?
I, that's a great question. I think the tiger mom, it leans more stereotypically like Chinese. I think
Yeah.
that, that culture of uh, that I see here, right? Of local students and how much pressure they get from their parents. But my parents were so open to my brother and I pursuing the arts. I was a dancer. My brother did music and basketball, and they sort of just supported any path that we wanted to go down with that.
Wow.
And yeah, it was lovely. I was really lucky
That's
for sure.
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. It really sounds like you have very like loving and supportive parents, which is
Yes. Yes.
that's cool. Obviously, we talked about, you growing up in a Filipino-American household, but then we want to zoom out a little bit to the whole Filipino-American
Mm.
identity and experience because, like, another very interesting topic that comes up whenever we have any Filipino-American guests on the show is that, like, how Filipinos in different places view the Filipino identity.
Mm.
So previously, I have received messages from some Filipino listeners telling me about how they don't really view Filipino Americans as real Filipinos because to
Mm.
them, like real Filipinos are those who grew up in the Philippines. And so I'm just wondering if you are familiar with like this type of perception. Have you ever been told that, oh, like you're not Filipino enough?
Yeah. This this always comes with having multiple cultural identities. The reality of it is you won't be I won't be. I won't be fully Filipino. I also won't be fully American. Those two things have to be true because they are, and you have to be able to hold them both together. I mean, to say that I am not Filipino enough, that certainly hurts. It, kind of kicks your ego down. I was interning for the Philippine Star, which is a newspaper in the Philippines, and I was at the Philippine National Police headquarters. I was doing all these little beats around the city, and there was like these really really old Pinoy guys chain smoking cigarettes. Like they'd covered the army and the PMP like for years, and they just saw me and they're like, oh, uh, this is just an American on a joyride, like back to the homeland, and she's just gonna just take this experience and then go back to America where she's comfortable. So they didn't really take me seriously then because they were like, oh, she's just American. She's not Filipino. She doesn't really know what it's like. And they're not wrong. The growing up in the Philippines is not my lived reality. I had never done that before. I don't know what it's like to grow up as a Filipino in the Philippines, but it doesn't mean that I don't deserve a spot or space in the Philippines. And same thing in the US. Like even though I'm not a white person, I'm not, a quote unquote American in that way. Um, I still deserve to be there as well because it's part of my identity. It's part of who I am. So I think both of those things have to be true. But that is the reality. You have to be comfortable with not fitting in both spaces.
And I mean, to be honest, like just looking across, like listening to different stories that we feature on Proudly Asian, I mean, I've arrived at this conclusion where like no one is actually 100% anything.
Oh, totally.
Like, like sometimes how people define not fitting in or like
Mm,
assess whether or not someone fits in is like whether or not this person thinks
the same as them, or like whether or not this person went through the same thing as them. But then, to be honest, no one actually went through the same
No, not at
lived
all.
experience. Like, we're
Yeah.
not cookies.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's this thing that I love to always talk about. So Bretman Rock is a Filipino content creator, and he was accepting this award, and he said I was gonna come up here and I was gonna lie and I was gonna say that I never saw myself in media, like I never saw myself on TV, but we were just watching Filipino channels when I was at home, so I only saw myself on TV. I only thought I was gonna be famous, and I was like, that's so true. Like, change the channel, like if, yeah, that's what he said. He was like, girl, change the channel. If you don't see yourself, change the channel. And that's also a really good reminder that you have to be aware of what you're letting in, what you're consuming, who's making you feel othered, who is saying that. Is that a reflection of their insecurities about their identity as well? So all of these things you have to take into consideration when you're allowing those negative impressions on your race and your culture.
I mean, of course, we talked a little bit about like your experience in America, where you also felt, like you would never be 100% American because like you're kind of a hybrid. So I'm just wondering, back in the US, have you ever experienced like much racism growing up, and was it particularly bad during COVID time?
Yes. I mean, I feel like every minority in America just has stories throughout their life of racism. And especially for being an Asian American woman, I've also experienced racism mixed with sexism and misogyny. So that's just a layer of that as well that other Asian American women struggle with in the US. But during COVID, yeah, there was actually this one time I was walking in my neighborhood. I lived in Capitol Hill, very quiet family neighborhood, quite bougie, honestly. It was the middle of the day, and someone had like rolled down the window to their car and started like screaming at me, China virus, China virus. And I couldn't hear what they were saying back because I started yelling back at them. I was kind of cussing them out and just, telling them to, go away and expletives. Sorry, mom. But yeah, it took me aback, but it's like, that's just what happens in the US when you're not white. Yeah. Yeah.
But then, like we talked a little bit about, like the kind of racism in the US or in the Western world. Like, I'm not saying we got used to it. I'm not saying that it's like it's fine. It's not fine. Any form of racism is not fine. But then I think one thing that's very interesting as I started doing this Proudly Asian show is like when I started explaining to people about like what we're trying to do here in Asia especially, or even sometimes talking to locals in Hong Kong, it's like, oh yeah, like for Proudly Asian, one of the things that we do is to really highlight unconscious bias, racism towards Asians. And then sometimes we would get questions like, oh, like racism towards Asians? Like, what's that like? Like, I've never experienced racism myself. I mean, not to say it's a bad thing because there are a lot of Americans who never left America, but then I feel like my read is also that because they never left Asia, and most of them are also like East Asians as well. So like some people would say like East Asians or like Chinese are kind of the white people in Asia.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I love it.
Like, I'm not gonna get cancelled by saying this because it's kind of true. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just wondering, like, like of course you experienced racism in the US, but then now that you are in Asia, have you ever seen any other forms of racism that kind of like took you by surprise?
Yeah. Isabella and I had been talking a little bit about this, but Asian racism towards other Asians is like, it puts American racism to shame because I mean the US I don't know what comedian I'm stealing this from, but it's like lazy racism. Like I think Americans are like, oh, they're Chinese, like it's very like general, but here in Asia, like they will pinpoint where you are from and what you're most insecure about your race, and then they'll make fun of it and be racist about it. Like we're really good at doing that. Asians like get to the point.
So brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, even my own Filipinos are so racist, you know, like it's like
It's even
so-
Filipinos are racist towards other Filipinos.
well, towards Chinese people, like other Asians, honestly.
Okay.
But that's how it is, right? You have every society and every culture has the stereotypes that come up with the racism and stuff. But anyways, yeah, I knew that Asian racism towards other Asians was real and, you know, there. I was taken aback at how blatant it was out here, I guess. I had a coworker tell me that Filipinos are poor and dirty and
What?
to my face. And it took me aback, really, because I was like, whoa, like that just, you really just said that out
What?
loud in public.
That really?
Yeah. And so it was really shocking. And when I asked to not work with this person anymore and to be taken off of work with them, I was told no because it was a business decision. And that was really shocking to me because, you know, I think in the US, if that could have gone
That
much,
person could have
much worse.
got in trouble.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It would have gone much worse for that person. So yeah, it was very, very
Wow.
intense time here. I was like, whoa, this is the real scary bit of racism towards other Asians is it's very blatant. Yeah. Very, very blatant. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. You know, like as we start, you know, having more of these conversations, like even highlighting racism between Asians, right?
Mm.
Like I do personally find, you know, like racism between Asians is a lot harder to prove, and it's a lot harder to convince fellow Asians that this is a problem.
That it happens. Yeah.
Because like recently on an episode we talked about how for the Cantonese language there's this specific racial term that's pretty disrespectful for the South Asian communities. I'm not sure if you know, because now living in Hong Kong, like if you heard of like acha.
No, I have not heard
So
that.
apparently like this term is used to describe like Pakistani people, but in a very
Oh, okay.
disrespectful way. And some people would kind of like liken it as the N-word for the Black
Oh,
community.
wow. Yeah. That's intense.
And then we were just talking about that, you know, how like sometimes, you know, like these languages, not like the people who still use these terms are meant to be racist, but then sometimes they pick that up because their grandparents and their parents kind of use that language and they thought it was neutral, but then they had no idea there was this disrespectful or like racist origin to it. So they start using that, and then when we highlighted that on the show, like we got some comments and some debate online, like some people whom I assume are East Asians or like Chinese, they argue back that, oh, this is not racist. Like they were just kind of like calling us out for like, oh, why are you suddenly making this term sound racist? But then I'm just like, bro, like we all know this is racist. And then the fact that I had to go back to some of my South Asian friends and say, hey, I know all my life that this is disrespectful, but can you once again just confirm to me that this is racist? And then they're like, it's racist. No.
Yeah, no, it's black and white. Yeah, I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, it's just how it is out here. It's cultural. It's just how they behave. And I can't get behind that. I can't get behind, you know, just plain rudeness and bigotry and blame it on a race or blame it on culture or just say, oh, that's just that it is what it is. Of course there will be the stereotypes of that. Of course that, you know, I understand where those stereotypes come from. I understand that there's different ways of doing things out here, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. I think that has been beat into me time and time again here. But as a veil to excuse bad behavior is absolutely unacceptable.
No, I mean, it's just so brutal, like, especially some of my Southeast Asian friends, like, their skin color would always be the subject of talks, conversations, and, like, they would just get casual comments like, oh, you look so dark. But then it's like, honestly, in the West, like you don't say things like that.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
You would get in so much trouble.
Yes.
saying that.
Yes.
But I mean, like going back to your family, I know like your parents are really cool. I mean,
They're
like
lovely.
we have talked before, and then you told me about like the kind of work that they do, and especially what stood out to me is the work that your mom does.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, she's doing really important work in
Yeah.
Chinatown, like assisting Filipino immigrants to settle in the US, to help them out. Like, can you tell us more about the kind of work that she does?
Of course, I would love to. I'm so proud of my mom.
Shout out to mommy.
Mom. She's so great. I love her. Yeah, my mom went back to school at 58. She
Wow.
has a bachelor's degree and she's also a doctor. So she like did med school already. So she has all the degrees now. She got her master's in marriage and family therapy. She now works as a counselor at this nonprofit called Chinatown Services, and it's just amazing what she does. I remember when she found the job, the description was asked for that person to be fluent in Tagalog because they were having to go and help Filipino families through like domestic issues, issues with their family, like where language is important. They can't speak English very well. She was telling me that, some of her clients don't speak English at all, right? Like they are able to live in America without having to speak English because there are lots of communities that are just little pockets of the Philippines, essentially. And with that comes a lot of cultural issues too, right? So I thought when she found that job, I was like, you're perfect for this. Like I cannot think of anyone better to help others. And yeah, I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of the work that she's doing. And she's just this incredible, selfless woman. I hope to be half of the woman she is. She's absolutely amazing. Also, like, that's so kick-ass to go back to school at 58. I could never. You could never convince me to go back to school. And she has a doctorate. Like, what? She went through 8 years of med school.
What was her thought process, like going back to school?
I don't know, but yeah, my mom had always thought about. She'd always, maybe I'll be a teacher. Maybe she'd always thought about it. But yeah, she was a homemaker for 26 years. So it's her first job in like 26, 30 years. It's so cute.
Oh wow!
So proud of you, Mom.
Wow. Super important work. Yeah,
Yes.
we need her on the show at some point.
Oh, totally. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, she would have so much to say.
Yeah,
Yes.
honestly, it's just like what you just mentioned about like language is so important. Like sometimes like for our generations growing up, like it's either for reasons because like our parents were taught that like you need to let your kids speak English, like
Yeah.
not their mother tongue, otherwise they couldn't fit in. Or like there's also another aspect to it, which is like growing up, we did not see a lot of people speaking their like mother tongues or like ethnic
Yeah.
languages, especially growing up in the West. Then we would think like, oh yeah, speaking our mother tongues is not like really that cool. But
Right.
then what you just mentioned there, it also reminded me how like at some point, like I heard about how like for the nursing community, especially in the US, Australia, and also in the UK, and maybe Europe as well, there's this like demand for nurses who
Mhm.
speak different ethnic languages or like Asian languages because like, I mean, it's fact, like Asians are everywhere. Like there's a
Right.
huge Asian community or even Cantonese speaking community in California.
Huge.
And like if nurses don't speak Cantonese, like how would the elderly be able to communicate
Right,
with
right.
their medical professionals? Like what's wrong with them? What do
Mhm.
they need? So like a lot of this is kind of overlooked, but then I mean, it's so important to have in the medical industry or like caregiving industry to have people who speak the native language
Absolutely.
of the different patients
Absolutely.
that they serve.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
great.
the point that you just made there is like how this job will require someone to speak native Tagalog. It's just like whoever made this a requirement is a saint because
I
like,
know. I feel like the job was finding my mom because
yeah.
I already know that she's helped so many people.
Mm.
And I can only imagine how mentally and emotionally taxing this job is. And I've met one of her coworkers and I've heard all of their stories as well. And these people do such incredible work in
Yeah.
their communities, and you would not have known at all what was happening right underneath your nose. So yeah, so proud of her. I'm so proud of my mom.
Also, it's scary for people to move to a new country, and especially if they don't speak any English,
Yeah.
and it helps a lot being able to speak to someone who speaks their language.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And now, I mean, I would like to move on a little bit and talk a little bit more about your experience living in Asia,
Mm,
because obviously you moved to Hong Kong a little more than a year ago, but I know that it's not your first time living
yes.
in Hong Kong, right? But being back in the city a little more than a year ago, like, what did you think of that? What do you think of that now? Did your opinion change? Did everything turn out as expected for you?
Yeah, so I was an exchange student at City University in 2018. Absolutely fell in love with Hong Kong. I mean, how could you not? This place is incredible. It's just the city lights you on fire. It fills you with so much possibility and light, and I love it. And I was so excited to have this opportunity to move back with my company. Being 21 and 26 is very different.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it was a great experience here as a college student. Absolutely loved it. As an adult and being someone a little bit older, and I kind of became a little bit more introverted as I got older and being more of a homebody. Going to LKF every weekend, honestly.
Is it
It
Lan
was
Kwai Fong? It's the
yes.
party district in Hong Kong. But I heard people don't go to LKF anymore these
Yes,
days.
I've heard that
Like
as
it's no
well.
longer
Yeah.
the spot.
It's really, which kind of makes me sad because it rocked back then. It
It
rocked.
did.
It was awesome. So yeah, Hong Kong's a tough city. It's certainly not, it's not easy. It's not for everyone, that's for sure. Things didn't turn out the way that I planned in terms of the job, but I'm so blessed for this experience. I feel so privileged. So no regrets at all my time here.
Let's go.
Yeah.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
We hope. Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah.
I mean, it's like Hong Kong is amazing, but
Yeah.
sometimes it could be intimidating. It could be a
Absolutely.
little too fast paced for people. So, I mean, obviously, before you moved to Hong Kong for the first time for uni, right? Were you aware of the presence of Filipino
Mm,
domestic workers in the city, and how did that make you feel?
yeah. So yes, definitely you feel their presence everywhere. I actually for me loved it and embraced it. Loved hearing Tagalog. Also quickly realized that most folks in the service industry are Filipinos,
Mm.
so they became my first friends out here. I would hear the Tagalog and I'd be like, "Oh, hey, are you Filipino?" and start talking to them, and so w- once again, Filipinos, we're a massive community. Like we look out for each other. And so I coming here feeling nervous and feeling just alone and lost. I quickly found my place back with the Filipinos in the city, and a lot of them were OFWs. And um, I think there's a sort of re-education a little bit about domestic help. One, Filipino OFWs face so much discrimination and such poor working conditions. When at the end of the day, we just need to make a good life for people. They're working for their families, they're working to make money. Treat them well, treat them with dignity. Um, don't pity, just be aware that, this is someone's livelihood. This other people in another country are relying on this person's job. So I guess when I do see OFWs, and I typically see them, especially on Sundays and by the harbor making TikTok videos, it actually makes me so happy because it's like, oh, that's so nice. Like they get to find joy and have each other and have a day off. And at the end of the day, they get to make money to send back to their families. Like that's all we want, right? We all want a good life. We want our families to be safe and fed and happy and healthy. How everyone does that and what you need to do to get there always looks different. So just make sure that you are kind to everyone, that you give them that dignity, and that, there isn't like this pity or this feeling that they're lesser than you or anything. But yeah, I do know that it's just so common out here as well,
Yeah.
right? And the labor is so cheap. So I actually was really happy when some of my friends who do have helpers said, they pay extra because their rates are so low. And that made my heart very happy because it also made
They
me feel like,
value them.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I do the same thing. I also have a helper. But yeah, just be aware.
Yeah.
If you're able to give more, you know? So yeah.
Yeah. And also it's just like they aren't different to us. I
No, not
mean,
at
like
all.
the funny thing is just like a lot of people in Hong Kong or wherever there are like domestic helpers presence, like some of the countries in Asia, they tend to think of them as like lower than them. But
Yeah.
then honestly, like they aren't different people. They are just like one of us. We all need to work. We all
Exactly,
have a
yeah.
job, and
Mhm.
being a domestic helper is also just another job, another form
Totally.
to like make income. So I mean, it's just one of those jobs. So I don't understand why people would feel entitled to like
Yeah.
insulting them whenever they see them, or like there would be
Yeah.
some of these like really negative stereotypes going around, like domestic helpers. You know, sometimes you might even hear comments like, "Oh, don't let the helper touch that. Like their hands are dirty."
Yeah.
Or like, "Of course she would steal stuff. She's a
Mm.
helper." You know,
Right,
these are
right.
just so damaging.
Yeah. And it once again, it's going back to that piece around dignity, right? That we're all just trying to get by, you know,
Mm.
like all of us, truly, we
We
all.
all kind of employees
Yeah,
here, you know?
seriously. Everyone answers to someone, okay? Like,
Like
you know?
even Tim Cook is an employee when you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've had this conversation with my mom a lot actually because, and I do appreciate that my friend, for instance, who referred me to this helper, he was like, are you okay with the fact that she's Filipino? And I love that he asked. It was nice that, you know, that he asked. And I was like, if anything, I'm happy she is. So I know that I know where this money is going. You know, I know that it's helpful for her. And I'm so happy that you're giving her more too. Like that warms my heart as your friend. And so, yeah, just being aware of the language that you use
Mm,
and how you think about OFWs as well.
mhm.
But yeah.
I mean, just never really think of ourselves as like better than, you know, anyone
Absolutely.
at all.
Totally.
You know, other than the presence of like Filipino domestic helpers in the cities, I'm just wondering, you know, like during your experience living in Hong Kong, like was there any other like moments where you felt this culture shock? You're like, whoa, like this is so
Yeah.
different, you know, like even, you know, being Asian in
Mm,
Asia, but then at the same time, you know, you're not the same type of Asian
yes.
as them.
Yeah. Um, so not a culture shock, but something that to me was quite funny was most folks think I am Chinese here. And the first thing I'll get is people will speak to me in Cantonese. And then I always have to follow it up with like, sorry, like, you know, in like a
Yes.
very American accent, like, sorry, what did you say? And I get this face every time someone goes, "Ah," like it's like them realizing that
I get
yeah.
it. Yeah,
They're
that
just like,
like
ah,
it's
and
either
then-
sometimes like a bit of a disgust as well. It's like,
totally.
why do you
Yeah, like so, like, and I always just like, I'm so sorry I exist. Like, I'm sorry and I'm not Chinese. You know, like that's like my first reaction. I'm just like, oh, I'm so sorry. So that was a bit of like a shock. I was like, I didn't realize just how exasperating it was for me to exist and speak English. But a lot of it for me was just language barriers, like
Mm.
the hurdles of moving to a country where you don't know the language is intense, especially in a place like Hong Kong where I was like filling out paper applications to get a bank account. Like things are not as efficient here as you would think. In terms
Oh,
of like getting settled into life out here, that was very difficult and very
yeah.
difficult to figure out on my own, not speaking the language. So yeah.
So that's one of the culture shocks, you know, language barrier, you
Yes.
know, and the shock whenever people just realize, oh, you look Asian, but you don't speak our language,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. But what about because like a little more than a year ago you moved here for work,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously you've worked for quite a few years in the US as well. I'm wondering, like, from an Asian American perspective, like,
Mm.
how do you view the difference between the work culture in the US and also in Asia?
A very layered question, Isabel. Lots of layers.
We could go anywhere with
Absolutely.
this.
Would love to. um, the on the surface, some of the things that I had been thinking about, folks just start work way later here and then work till
Mm.
later. In the US, I think there's more of a tendency to start work earlier and end earlier or try to end earlier. I remember I showed up on the first day at like 8:50 thinking, oh my God, this is embarrassing. Like, this is honestly like too late for the first day because typically, like in the US, when I was going into the office, like you try and be in your seat by 8:30. You know, like you definitely want to show up and be there by 9. People were trickling in around like 10:30, and I was like, "What?" You know, I was like by myself at 8:50, 9 o'clock. So I think folks work later, and
In the US, is it because like sometimes you have to work across time zones between the East Coast and West Coast? That's why.
no, I don't know what it is in the U.S. I actually haven't really thought about it that much, but yeah, there's. I think our colleagues in the U.S. would be shocked to see what the office looks, at least pre 2020.
So
like would be
everyone
shocked
in
to
the
see office.
States is a morning person.
I think there's a okay. This is gonna get into like, but like I think also just white people just like they eat dinner earlier, so they want to end work earlier.
It's a white people dinner time.
I really think that. I honestly think that's what it is. I'm so sorry, but like it's. I mean, it's true. Like for some reason, there's also like I feel like wellness and like like the like
bed
the
by 9.
yes, like the like the Malibu wellness bitches. Sorry, the Malibu wellness girlies who are like who are just like my 5 to 9 before my 9 to 5. You only see American people making those TikToks. There's no one in Asia that's like my 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. routine before my 9 a.m. 9 to 5 job. Like, no one's gonna do that out here. So yeah, that was a big one for me. And I personally don't like that. Because I also had been working in the US for a long time. I do start work earlier and I try and end earlier. So the starting later and working later was really difficult for me to adjust to.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess it makes sense also like for people in LA, like they need to commute earlier.
Yeah.
To avoid the traffic.
Right. No,
so they
true.
go in a lot earlier and then they also kind of like leave work at around, like 4 p.m. to avoid the traffic home as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense. Right.
Absolutely. And then one thing I do love so much about here that I will miss is people eat lunch here. Like you take lunch. You really do. Like,
so white people don't eat lunch.
Well, we do this thing called a corporate salad. We go to Sweet Green and then we pay like $15.75 for the most mediocre Caesar salad you've ever had in your life. And then you go back to your desk and you eat that salad. Funny enough, I missed America so much when I first moved here. I like craved that. I was like, I want a corporate salad. Like I just want a chopped salad that I overpaid for on my PR salary, and I want to sit at my desk and I want to eat it. But I love lunch here because people take lunch like up to the hour too. Like even if people are busy, like people will sit and eat lunch for like 15 minutes to half an hour. I will definitely be doing that in the US.
And there's so much diversity when it comes to like lunch food, and it's so cheap as well.
So cheap. Yeah, so cheap.
Like you could literally like get Korean, Japanese, Chinese,
Anything.
or like I think that there's this dish that's so popular in Hong Kong. They call it like this rice.
Oh,
which
yeah,
is essentially
sounds fun.
Yeah, sounds fun. Yeah. Like you go
it's my favorite.
You go to a shop and then they have all these like dishes ready, and then like just from the window you just point at which dish you want. Like you probably pick like 2 to 3 dishes, and then they would just like put them in like a box of rice, and then you would just like take it to go.
Yes, for your American listeners, it's Panda Express, but
yes.
like actually,
I didn't even
like
think of
actual
that, but
Chinese
better,
food. Yeah.
much better.
Obviously, yes. So I kind of miss Panda Express. Is that bad? I kind of miss it.
Same.
American Chinese food is very different. We talk a lot. We talk about this with our other colleague, who's American Chinese, and there's a different vibe to American Chinese food.
Yeah. I've also like talked about this on some previous episodes where like I do miss fake Chinese food sometimes,
Totally.
like westernized Chinese food, because you can't get it anywhere in Hong Kong, in China. And then I've been asked too many times like, oh yeah, why do you crave fake Chinese food when you get real Chinese food here? I'm just like, it just tastes different.
It tastes different. A Trader Joe's orange chicken, so different. So good.
Well, the MSG goodness.
Yeah.
And obviously like people start work earlier in the US. So that's one of the workplace cultural differences. Like anything else?
Well, so the other thing is that people are all up in your personal life out here. I feel like the work culture, the work and Well, the work and personal life mix a lot more here. People are much more aware of what other people are doing outside of work because people just follow each other on Instagram like immediately. I was very shocked about that. I was like, whoa, like, senior leaders are like following me on Instagram. That would just like never happen naturally in the US. Like, you do that with the colleagues that you're close with, but it was like instantaneous here.
It feels
and I
like
was
the
like,
boss enter the
whoa.
chat.
Yeah. And I mean, frankly, it makes people really uncomfortable. Like a lot of folks talk about that, right? Like they say like, oh, like they saw my Instagram story, or oh, and I can't post this because they're following me. And it's like, my God, leave us alone. Like we've got to have our personal lives. And so I thought that was kind of shocking to me.
So you
at
reckon it's
first.
kind of like an Asian thing?
I think so. I think and I listen, it's not, it doesn't come from a bad place. Like I think it's not, also behave on social media, right? Like I think everyone should act on social media.
Don't put anything embarrassing on your social
totally.
media.
Whether or not your boss is following you. But yeah, I feel like there is something that someone else was saying about our office is like, people say, oh, you've gained weight or you've lost weight. Like people notice these like little things about you.
This is a super Asian workplace thing.
Yeah.
Like I've got it like elsewhere as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was just like, I mean, like I remember entering this elevator and then it was my first time bumping into this colleague. Like he's this like middle-aged man. And then the first thing he said to me like, oh, you look like you ate well. I was like, yeah,
stop looking at
me.
Yeah. People are more like, just hyper aware of it and then say it. Once again, I think this is not coming from a bad place. And I mean, my own Lola does this, right? She gets mad when she thinks I'm fat, and
sometimes
then mad
like
when she thinks I'm skinny.
Like...
Yeah, she's like, oh, you've gotten too fat. And then when I lose weight, she's like, oh, you've gotten too skinny. So yeah, it's like classic Asian behavior, but seeing it in a workplace was wow, especially working in the US for so long.
It feels like crossing the boundary a little bit.
Yeah, which once again, cultural difference, right? It's just not something that would happen in the US. But yeah, I did not get used to that.
Like in the US, is everyone like quite PC? Would they have a lot of like pretext? Oh, I know this is like your privacy. Like you don't have to tell me, but
Yeah, there's a lot more emphasis on that.
Yeah.
We work in PR, so PR is, I think, naturally a very chatty industry. But yeah, people can have totally separate work and life, I think, in the US much easier than it is here in Hong Kong.
That's true. Like, I mean, like for myself, my personal preference is that I won't really follow people that I work with unless, like, the protocol that I go by is like, unless the person follows me first.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. I mean, if the person follows me first, it's kind of like, it will be a bit of a DICK if I don't follow back because I know the person.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the US, I remember when I did get into like a good rhythm and relationship with some of our senior leaders, like they would follow me first on Instagram. And I'd be like, okay, great. So that means that we're on that level, like you let them set the tone.
Yeah.
But when you get like every senior leader following you on Instagram when you first join, you're like, whoa.
It's a bit nerve-wracking, isn't it?
Wow, this is a lot.
So you have to watch your behavior a little bit. Yeah. I mean, definitely whenever I come across like someone I work with, and especially if the profile is private, I was like, no, I'll respect the person's privacy. Like, I'll leave that alone.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and also it's interesting how like work conversations sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw it from your IG story,
or Instagram, yes.
I hate that. Were you up late last night? It's just like I mean, my personal life is kind of separate. Like it doesn't really like I keep it very separate as well. Whenever it's like personal life and work life, like I never let my personal life bleed into my work life, and the same goes for the other way around.
It's hard. It's a small office. We know a lot about each other. We work a lot together. You're in the trenches with these people for, long hours. So obviously, like, it's lovely to make those connections at work. But I think especially with leadership, it's a little bit. Yeah.
I get you. Do you, I mean, I know you work with clients as well. Like, do you follow your clients? What do you think?
Don't. I do know folks that do, though. Interestingly enough, what do I feel about following clients on Instagram? I've never followed a client on Instagram, so I don't know. But yeah, I think it's like if you have that relationship with them, like some people have known their clients for years and talk about their lives and talk about kids and stuff. Totally fine. Follow them on Instagram. But yeah, I have not done so myself yet.
I mean, I agree with that. Like, I also won't really like be the first person to follow them. Like, if they
Yes.
follow me,
Yes.
fine. Like, I guess it's like, I guess I did something right that they're
Right.
okay with me.
Yeah. Good stamp of approval.
And I mean, or not, just to kind of like sum up your experience in Asia, like, I mean, whenever we talk to some Asian Americans who moved to Asia, moved to Hong Kong, they might say, oh, you know, like they feel a little bit too American for Asia. And then when back home, it's like a bit too Asian for America. Like, have you ever felt that?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. It's a constant journey to feel too much and too little at the same time, sort of what we were talking about. But yeah, my Americanness really stood out here. My accent, the way I talk, I'm super loud. I'm, you know. But yeah, that's been, I mean, it's also blatantly pointed out to me, right? Like that is like the first thing I heard about myself in the office is like, oh yeah, you're the really loud one. And I'm like, right. Is there anything else that I contribute to in this office? But it definitely has put a spotlight on a lot of my Americanness. Being out here and being myself has made me realize that maybe I was more American than I thought I was. And so yeah, you just have to remember the duality, right? You have to appreciate the parts of you that are American because yeah, I'm American. What else did you expect? Did you expect me to come out not American? You know, like I'm from America. I've been there for 20 years. Like it's part of who I am. It's of course I'm going to be American. Of course I'm going to sound American. And it felt like a lot of my stronger qualities, like being, you know, honest and being outspoken, were at odds with the culture here. You know, I had been told that I was being passive aggressive or that my convictions were too strong. And but I really like those parts of me. I've had to build those parts of me. I've had to build a lot of that confidence, and I'm not gonna not be that person. You know, that's a huge part of who I am. And if that's me being American, if that's, or you know, it feels like that. It feels like that's what's being said. Like, oh, you're too much and you're too American. Then yeah, red, white, and blue, baby. Then that's me. Then that's who I am. So yeah, I accept that. I accept those parts of me.
Yeah, I mean, that's who you are, and no one can tell you to stop being who you are. And honestly, it's like, I mean, it speaks really more about the people who call you out, you know, like who see those qualities of you as, you know, like negative or like weaknesses. It tells us more about them than you, because they're not ready for that level of honesty. You're not an evil person. You're not doing bad things.
Yeah, it's filtering out those voices, right? It's filtering what is going to impact you. And it's way easier said than done. I have cried more days than I'd like to admit here because of what people have said. It's been tough, but you take a step back and you think, why did that person make me feel othered? What is that part of you that that felt bothered by that? I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is ego. Your ego feels bruised, right? I feel upset that I'm not seen as normal or as someone that's fitting in. But that's their definition of normal. That's their definition of fitting in. Exactly. So once again, two things can be true. You have to accept those dualities of life out here. You have to accept those dualities of yourself as well. And what people say to you, like kind of what you were saying, it's probably a projection of their own insecurities about their identity or about who they want to be as well. So yeah.
It's probably because, you know, I mean, just at some point, maybe like no one ever told them that it's okay to share their voice.
Yeah.
No one told them it's okay to be confident, to believe in themselves, right? So when they come across someone who, you know, like yourself, you're very competent, you believe in yourself, and, you know, causes a lot of discomfort.
Yeah. But also, I think this is something to do with, you know how when you turn 25 and your prefrontal cortex like sets in and you just start like thinking rationally. So that's what the past like 2 years have been for me, almost 2 years. And you kind of just take a step back and you're like, huh, maybe I do like myself. Maybe I am smart. Maybe I'm not dumb. Maybe people like me. Like maybe I'm not totally hated. And when you start to think about that and think about how much you've let those voices dictate your life, you're so ready to be done with it. You're so ready to just be like, well, then that's not for me. And you're able to wash your hands of it much easier than you did before. Because then you just start to know yourself better. You start to know what drives you and what can fuel the fire and what you just need to throw away.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like for places where like we have to shrink ourselves to the point where it makes sense to those people, like those aren't the places that worth our and your time.
Yes, absolutely.
And with that, it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called
Rapid Fires.
Now, in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions that they've got asked at some point in life. So for Jess' case, it will be some biased questions about who she is, what she does as Filipino-American. So Jess, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's get started. First question. All Filipinos come from the islands.
We get this stereotype that we're all like these like island people who just live on the beach and live in like huts and
That's not about life.
Yeah, it's not about life, but not all Filipinos do that. I got that a lot. Or they'll be like, "What island are you from?" And I'm like, Manila, the city. Like, I'm from that island. They just kind of expect that folks are always just,
Interesting.
climbing up trees for coconuts.
And next one. All Filipinos are poor and dirty. Oh my God.
Oh, I hate getting that. I hate that. And unfortunately, that's something that people really do think. I mean, you said so yourself, like someone saying, oh, don't touch that because they touched it and it was dirty. It's a real bias out there. It's sad. Yeah.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And the next question. All Filipinos can sing and dance.
No, they cannot. No,
Can
they
you?
cannot. I can. I actually can.
So low-key bragging here.
I was blessed. I was very blessed with the singing and dancing gene. But yeah, no, like my mom can't sing for shit. Like she is the most beautiful singer in church. It's the cutest thing. You just hear this little voice from like on my shoulder and she's so cute. But yeah, mom, she can't carry a tune.
Sorry, mom.
She can't. But I can sing and dance, and my brother is a good musician. He can sing as well. So it's definitely a stereotype. I do hate hearing that though, like because when people do find out that I can sing or that I can dance, they're always like, oh, it's because you're Filipino, or like, oh, I know a Filipino in my choir and they're so good, or like, oh, I just love that Filipinos know how to do it or do singing and dancing. And yeah, it just sounds weird.
Yeah, it's annoying because
weird.
they dismiss your talent for, oh, you're just Filipino. Of course you can do that.
I think also when I was younger, hearing that was so odd, like hearing that as a very young person and having like someone older be like, oh, all you Filipinos can sing and dance. You're standing there and you're 12 and you're like, what? Like,
have you ever been asked to perform because you're Filipino?
That's interesting. Not because I was Filipino. Although Filipino families make you perform for them. I have so many horror stories of this. Like, even just a twirl. Like, my family would all sit down, like, at a party and be like, do it. Like, do it. Go, or, like, grab the karaoke mic and sing. Like, they'll make you entertain them. Seriously. Yeah, it's honestly, it's brutal out there.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Wow. That concludes our rapid bias segment for this episode. Okay, so for us to close out the episode, we normally ask our guests one final question. So, Jess, to you, what does it mean to be proudly Filipino-American?
It means to be wholly and truly yourself, to embrace all the parts of your culture that has made you who you are. I'm so lucky to be Filipino. I love being Filipino. It rocks. We rock. I just love it. Embrace it. I think people who are proudly themselves is just such a beautiful thing to witness. So thank you, Isabel, for giving us this platform to love ourselves and to talk about it. It's truly been such a wonderful experience. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story so generously and honestly with us. Because I mean, I'm so inspired by you, how you carry yourself. And like you mentioned, I mean, honestly, being proudly ourselves is the only option.
It is. That's it. It can't be anything other than that. Also, like, you're going to only have yourself for the rest of your life, pretty much. You're gonna want to love where you live, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is your body, this is your skin, this
you
is
only
who you
live
are.
this life once.
Truly.
So make it count. Make it count. Thank you so much, Jess.
Thanks,
I'm gonna miss you so
Isabel.
much.
I'm gonna miss you. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.